Guten Abend, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Eine kleine Programmanpassung. Wir werden über das Musical Life in Africa sprechen mit Eddie Hatitye und Andre Le Roux. Das Gespräch findet auf Englisch statt, aber ich denke, Sie werden das alle mitkriegen, worum es geht. Eddie Hatitye, Zimbabwean born and raised, living in South Africa, musician, producer, music manager, culture manager, director of the Music in Africa Foundation on my left side, so on your right side. Andre Le Roux, South African, director of the Samro Foundation, member of the board of the Music in Africa Foundation. Okay, we're talking today about musical life in Africa, especially in South Africa. Andre Le Roux, what is it that you do?
We do lots of things, and I like to say what Eddie said earlier today, that there's Africa, which is not a country, a big continent, and South Africa that has a whole range of different languages and different musics and different cultures. What we do is we like GEMA in Germany, we're the Samro in South Africa, so we administer rights and royalties on the one hand, and that's my masculine side. My feminine side looks at the arts. We look at music. We look at supporting and fostering music, bursaries, scholarships, and a range of different programs to support live music, and a music archive of about 67,000 scores of written music dating back to the 1920s.
Let's think about music and identity. How does music contribute to Africa's identity?
Music is an integral part of African identity. It's part of who we are. It's at birth, at death, the whole life cycle, the musicological, ethnomusicological life cycle. But even more so, music is not just music. Unlike in a Western context when people see music separately, with us, music, dance, performing arts are all one thing. It's part of how we express ourselves when we're angry. Even when we're fighting on the streets, we dance and we sing. It's part of our politicians' lifestyle. Someone was talking to me today about Nelson Mandela, and they imitated his dance styles. Thabo Mbeki wasn't much of a dancer, our president, so he was regarded as cold by the populace. Our latest president, Jacob Zuma, he's a singer and a dancer, and he enamors himself to the public. So music is part of who we are, it's part of our cultures, it's the way we express ourselves, and it's our national anthem is regarded as one of the foremost in the world because it's also a tool for nation building, incorporating more languages than any other anthem.
Would you say this is typical South African, or is this all African, not including maybe the northern part of Africa, but we hear a lot about music having a different function for living.
Music and life, it's often difficult for me to speak about being all African because if you look at the language groupings, you have Francophone Africa, which is very French, you have Lusophone Africa, and you have Arabic Africa, and you have Anglophone Africa. But really music and identity, music and expression is the same very much on the continent. There's still a sense of the organic nature of life, the organic nature of expression. And no longer, quite often there's the typically African kind of thing about it has to have a drum. And if you heard Andiswa earlier, the voice in the southernmost parts of Africa is the most important. The voice is what carries us all. It is the instrument of choice in Southern Africa. In other parts of Africa, it's strings instruments. Yeah.
So Africa is not a country. There's another project Eddie Hatitye is doing or working for. You work for Music in Africa Foundation that I know very, very well because I'm also part of it. Eddie, please tell us, what is Music in Africa?
Okay, so Music in Africa is a Pan-African initiative, non-profit, that is headquartered in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we are Andre's neighbors. But really what we are trying to do is to support the African music sector. We realize that there are obviously a lot of challenges, some you know obviously, and some that our audiences know. We have a very young market. We have very unique challenges, some of them financial, but also some of them quite unique. Knowledge, exchange, networking, etc., etc. So we set up Music in Africa as an initiative that tries to address those things. And we do this online and offline. Online, we've got a website called musicinafrica.net, which is the one stop, we want to believe, for anyone who's interested in the African music sector, musicians particularly, who want to reach other musicians, connect, find helpful information. On the other side, we do offline activities, seminars, trainings, concerts for musicians, talent discovery, and also lobbying.
Great. So what are the future plans? You already described this today, I think at 3 o'clock or something. What are the future plans for that project? What do you think, what will happen where will Music in Africa be in 10 years?
Okay, so Music in Africa has been existing now for under 5 years. 3 years of the project was the startup phase, trying to set up structures. And we've been actually operating now for, I think, just above 2 years. And in these 2 years, we've seen a lot of good response from the African continent. Musicians want a platform like ours. Institutions believe that the network that we are creating is very healthy for the sector. So the general focus for the coming years is to expand Music in Africa over Africa. So we want to cover the whole sub-Saharan African continent and to include as well North Africa. But also we want to expand our offline activities. We've got a Facebook group that has about now 120,000 likes. But the important thing is that we receive a lot of messages from musicians who not only want information and a website that is great, but they want practical solutions. Practical solutions, funding, training, effective connections, etc., etc. So this is one area that we want to build. In 5 years, 10 years, like you asked, we want to be all over Africa, and we also want to have a strong offline program.
Thank you. Talking about musical life in Africa, Andre, what is the current situation, and especially what are the challenges for the music scene in South Africa nowadays?
One of the major challenges for the music scene is that musicians aren't making much money from recordings. And the money from royalty income takes a long time to come. So to make a livelihood as an artist, you have to depend on live performance. Live performance is the bread and butter of the artist all over the world, more especially so in Africa, more especially so in Southern Africa. What we've done as the Samro Foundation is we partnered with the Norwegian government, the Norwegian embassy, to build a concerts essay program to stabilize the live music scene in South Africa. We looked at some research in 2013. We presented the Songlines research, which is available on our website and on the Music in Africa website, where most of the research is. And what we analyzed was that there's a lot of festivals, but there aren't sufficient regular small performance spaces. And what an artist needs to hone their craft is regular performance with good audiences so that there can be that level of engagement. So what we built was a way to develop circuits in 3 cities and 3 provinces, Johannesburg, Gauteng, Cape Town in the Western Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. And we stabilized through a subsidy mechanism about 20 venues. And then we also built, that subsidy is used to make sure that the artists get paid. So no longer a venue would say to you, Jens, do you want to come play bass for your supper? Or not pay you a fee and say you should get a door deal. And that model of developing, stabilizing small venues, stabilizing circuits within the cities, leads to stabilization of a live music circuit. And that circuit is important for regular livelihoods, because to only perform at festivals means you wait for a nice big festival and you get fat and then you starve for a long time. Regular small spaces means you eat more regularly, your family eats more regularly. The sad part is that this was adopted through the Norwegian government, and sometimes we depend on overseas donors. It would be wonderful if the state engaged and got more involved. Another thing that we did is that South Africa is a very big country with very poor public transport infrastructure, and that is the same for the rest of the continent. So for bands to travel, not only in South Africa itself, but on the continent, one needed to incentivize that. With the British Council and the Norwegian government, we built a mobility fund to incentivize artists to pack their bags and travel. You know, strap something on your back and a PA system, jump in your car or take a bus. So 25,000 Rand for South African travel, and for Southern African travel, it's about 40,000 Rand. So far, it has benefited small audiences from 10 to 20 people, in excess of 60,000 people, and it has benefited artists in excess of 1,000 artists performing in schools and in regular venues. And I think we're trying to make a difference in the real lives of artists where they generate income, which is live performance.
This is very interesting because it seems to be a very important point for all of Africa to be mobile, to get the mobility for artists. And I hope you will also get money from the government at the end and not only rely on European institutions. Seems to be very, very important in the future.
Mobility for artists it's not just important all over Africa. I recently came back from Marseille and they were talking about similar models. I think everywhere in the world, what you need is artists to be able to travel like a conveyor belt of gaining cultural expression, gaining knowledge, and gaining money in your pocket.
Eddie, how can a platform like Music in Africa give artists new opportunities for income generation? Like, do you think this kind of virtual mobility that a platform like yours can give can be of any help?
Yeah, definitely. I think it takes time, but one thing that you said that will always remain the same is that all the money now is in live performance. And an artist's challenge at the moment is, how do I make myself bookable? How do I create a profile? How do I create an identity? How do I let people book me? So it's not only about how you can be booked, it's how you become popular and how you let people know that you are there and this is the kind of music that you do. And this is one thing that Music in Africa addresses. Since we launched the website, an artist is able to go there, create a profile, and hopefully build a fan base, right? The same you do on Facebook, but Facebook is not specialized on music. Now, Music in Africa is trying to specialize on African music. So you go there and you get people to know what you do. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it doesn't have to end there. So people know about you, and this is the second phase of Music in Africa where we're saying, how do we make it possible for people to book you online, right? So if we are able to play that role, we are making a huge difference in the sector. But also what we know is that opportunities for live performances are not that much. So what we have to do as an organization is also partly the lobbying that I've talked about. We have to try to bring people together who are involved in the live side of things so that there can be more opportunities. Already Music in Africa partners with a lot of circuits, festival circuits. And as we are here, as you know, we are here with a group of musicians from Cameroon. And we are trying our best also to create performing opportunities for the musicians.
Great. There seems to be a need for living activities for this special 37 degrees that we all have. You call it offline activities. What is it about?
I think I've already touched on a lot of things. It's just basically, as an organization, we divide our activities into two. One is the website, and we've got a dedicated team of journalists, not only in South Africa, but also across Africa, who are basically, journalists. And we also have a team of cultural operators who are working on the offline activities. And an offline activity is anything that we are physically doing. So from events, concerts, from even the smallest performance that we just saw here, we consider it as an offline activity, and it's through partnerships with organizations like Andres that we are able also to deliver these kind of things.
Comparing Europe and Africa, what do you think, Andre, are the main differences between musical life in the two continents, just from your point of view?
That is a massive continental question. I think that in Europe, you come to a space like this and you see amazing facilities. You look around and you see huge expendable incomes. Someone like Andiswa has to come here to study at the best schools in the world. So you have fantastic resources in Europe. You have fantastic cultural policy. But more than that, you've got institutions, and you've got foundations that are quite effective, and you have a willing state that supports and promotes culture. And that almost nullifies, to a small extent, the work of the institutions within those societies, because we came from the pop music school and it's very much state supported. So the partnerships and the funds are all there. In South Africa, in Southern Africa, and there are different parts. In South Africa itself, you've got quite a sophisticated music industry. And Eddie likes to talk about us as being slightly different to other countries. I mean, the South African Collection Society, like Samro, was voted and ranked one of the 5 top societies in the world, not because of income, but because of efficiency. In terms of the recording industry, South Africa owns up to about 80% of the African recording industry, but the entire African recording industry is about 2%. So on the continent, there's a lack of state support for culture. There's a lack of funds for culture. There's a lack of institutions that can promote culture. There's a lack of efficient policy, even when it comes to intellectual property, cultural policy, and the institutional policy and regulatory mechanisms that can support culture. However, there's an abundance of talent. There's an abundance of potential. There's an abundance of goodwill. There's an abundance of raw material. There's an abundance of culture and cultural expressions that are not necessarily noted down in a book. There's an abundance of the materials that can reinvigorate Europe. And I think often when I talk about cultural exchange, nowadays I was at a European Union conference last year, and people are talking about the dwarfing of Europe and the rising of Africa. And I don't think the one has to shrink too much and the one has to grow too much, but we can start through culture leveling the playing fields. We also use culture quite often as a tool for reconciliation. We use the arts and we use music as a tool for healing. And I think in that way, music and the arts and the African arts has got some lessons that we can teach Europe, especially with the crises that are happening at the moment. For multicultural understanding, you and I do not have to share the same language, but we can listen to the same music and respect each other's cultures.
Thank you, Andre. My last question goes to Eddie. You seem to be optimistic. Why is that?
Okay, personally, I'll just be selfish and say this. There's a band, very, very, very good band from Cameroon that we brought together. So we have to see this band. If you have time at 8:30 today at the Broad Fabric, we've got a band called Makase. Wonderful band. Please be there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens.